So many of the problems that we have as longboarders comes from a feeling of being stuck, where we're in the wrong position on the board and we can't seem to get ourselves out of it. Well, today is a really important video where I'm going to be providing you guys with one of the most important things that we can learn for seamlessly positioning ourselves on any part of the board that we want to, as well as avoiding the feeling of being stuck and the misconceptions around cross-stepping and shuffling. And with all of this, we're actually going to apply something from chess and how this actually affects our strategy of positioning and moving on the longboard. If you are new here, my name's Considine, and I'm here to educate as well as share my learnings and experiences like this one today with you all. If you feel like this is useful, then please feel free to subscribe. And if you know that it might be helpful for anyone you know, feel free to share it with them. But this one's an important one today, so let's get right into it. So like I spoke about at the start of the video, and what we're going to focus on today is the problem of feeling like you're stuck on your longboard. Now, I know this has been a big problem for me in the past, and it's something that I've coached a lot of people through. This feeling of being stuck and not knowing how to go from one place to another on the longboard. And this is partly due to a couple of different reasons. The first is that we are told that cross-stepping is the only way to move on a longboard, which is sort of true, and that we should avoid cross-stepping at all costs, which is true also. But what this does mean is that we're stuck on our board with nowhere to go, trying to manage these impossible sections whilst we're in the wrong place in the board, and we're just not feeling like we can move because we can't shuffle, and the cross steps won't provide adequate spacing to position ourselves on the correct part of the board that we're trying to go for, such as when we want to only make these minor adjustments either forwards or backwards. And for this today, I have come up with a solution, something I've been teaching for years, but to explain it properly, let's delve into the world of chess. So delving into the chess analogy, I want you to think about the different pieces and what they can do. In this example, I do want you to think about specifically the king and the queen. And this will involve how the king and the queen move along the board a little bit differently, which can help us move along our longboard a bit differently as well. So let's consider the king. The king can move one square at a time, up and down, anywhere it wants to on the board. It can move forwards, backwards, sideways, but it's not very efficient. If you move somewhere, and then there's another position that might be aiming for your king, it can easily get stuck. And moving away from your opposition is slow going, and you can definitely get caught in some tricky positions. For the king, I like to think that the board is fairly closed, where it only has limited options available. And I think that this is an interesting way to think of ourselves on the longboard as well. If we're only using cross-stepping as a way to move along the board, we can easily get stuck, and our positions on the board are limited. Now, this isn't to say that we can't get to where we need to with our cross-stepping or where we need to with our king, but everything needs to be well planned and perfectly executed. Your favorite surfers, you may see that for the most part they use predominantly cross-stepping, but there will be adjustments that are made every now and then that steer away from cross-stepping that I'd like to highlight to you now. Some of the problems that we often find with our longboarding is getting stuck just centimeters away from the nose when we're trying to nose ride, or not being quite far enough back if we're trying to land an effective turn. And this is where the queen comes into place. The queen, on the other hand, is much more fluid. It can move wherever, whenever, with much more ease. It's much harder to get stuck because the queen can easily move across the board wherever it needs to. To the queen, the board is open with so much possibility, ability to move wherever it needs to, and without such limitation. And if we take this into our longboarding, we want the same thing. We want our longboard to feel free and open, and like we've got the possibility to move anywhere we want to at any time. We also want to make sure that we're avoiding shuffling and utilizing our cross-stepping, but still able to make these minute adjustments up and down the board that don't require these big cross steps necessarily. So what are we going to do about that? Let's step into an example right now. So let's open up the longboard now. I'm going to show you this example, this method, where we can get anywhere we need to on the longboard and make some really small, minute adjustments without having to shuffle. And it opens the longboard up a lot more for us rather than having to cross step where we might need to take a bigger step. So let's get into that now. Alrighty guys, so just taking 10 seconds of your time to quickly show you through some of the Glide Surf Collective products. Obviously, I'm wearing the white hoodie here. It's one of my favorites. We've also got the hoodie in coal, and we've also got the same in the navy here. And then we've also got a range of our t-shirts as well. This here is an example of the shirt in the coal. So if you want to check these or plenty of the other selections that we have on the website, the link will be down below. Now let's get back into the video. So firstly, let me show you two examples where we might come into the problem we're speaking about today, where we're a little bit limited by our cross-stepping and our shuffling. So in this first example, you can tell this is a very, very common thing that happens to us as longboarders, where we'll take our first two steps, and then the next two steps towards the nose, we're already so close to the nose that these next two steps need to be really, really small, which is a problem because we're taking a cross step, which is already a difficult thing to do in the most unbalanced part of the board, and it needs to be a small step, which makes things even harder. So this is definitely something that we want to correct for. The other example that we have here is where we're not far enough back on the tail to be able to turn properly. If we readjust that back foot position and try and extend our back foot further back, it still doesn't get us quite where we need to be, but we can't cross step back because we'll end up too far on the tail. So this is something that we need to correct for as well. So again here, thinking about the queen on the chessboard analogy, we need to open things up so we can make some finer adjustments and position ourselves not only where the cross step will land us, but anywhere on the board. How do we do this? What I like to think about for this is the method where we actually close the gap and then cross. And what this means is that we come from a wider stance position and then we close our feeding position and then we can cross step after that. For the example where we are too close to the nose to fit in another two steps comfortably, what we need to do is think about making sure we're not going to shuffle, but our next two cross steps are going to be extremely difficult. So what we're actually going to do is when we're looking at moving forwards, but making a more fine adjustment, what we first need to do is we close the gap by bringing the front foot closer to the back foot. So we've got a narrow stance now, and then we cross through. We can't follow that up with another shuffle or another close because that will just be a shuffle. But if we're just moving one foot closer to the other, that is okay. It's not considered a shuffle, and then we can continue with a cross. The close always needs to be continued or followed by a cross. So we close the gap, and then as that next foot comes through into the cross step, we can see that it actually almost replaces where the front foot was. And this is really, really important because if you think about in the other example, the cross step would have needed to be going forwards or forward from that front foot. But now that the front foot has pulled back, that next step that we're doing with the cross step can actually land further back, which is a really, really important part here. And so we close, we cross, and then we can step to the nose much more comfortably. All right, and let's go through the other example now. So potentially where we're not on the right position for the tail to engage a turn effectively. Say we're coming back from the nose and we've done 1, 2, 3, 4 steps back, but we're not quite far enough back on the tail, and we actually need to get a smidge further back to engage the rail appropriately. In this instance, we would know that a cross step backwards would land us far too far back on the tail because the spacing for the two cross steps is just simply too big. But again, we don't want to shuffle, so what are we going to do about this? In the instance where we want to move a small distance backwards, so we just spoke about forwards towards the nose before, this time we're talking backwards towards the tail. What we want to do is instead of moving that front foot first, we're actually going to close the gap, bringing the back foot closer to the front foot. And in this way, we can see that as we bring that back foot closer to the front foot, we can replace where that back foot was with the cross, or with that front foot coming behind for that backwards cross step. And this is, again, a really, really good way to adjust the positioning so that we don't have to shuffle and we can fit our cross steps in nicely as well and still make all of our transitions look nice and smooth. So we're bringing that back foot forwards and then we're replacing with that front foot into the back foot position. So now that we've got that close and cross technique down pat and you understand what it's doing and what we need to do, I would like to say that land practice is absolutely fantastic for this because, again, it's muscle memory. It's thinking about how we're going to complete this positioning and the different foot sequencing when we're going forwards versus when we're going backwards. It'd be ideal if you could try and focus or recognize what your main limitations are at the moment with your surfing. Are you someone who gets caught a little bit away from the nose when you're trying to nose ride? Or are you not positioned correctly on the tail when you're trying to turn? And then you can use these elements to try and improve that. focus on that on land, so practicing at home and then translating that into the water will be so much easier.